Hello and welcome to another edition of Beyond the Hype. I'm your host, Alfred Edmond Jr., Senior VP and Executive Editor at Black Enterprise. And as always, we have another great show with another unique guest. Listen, you know that this is the 20th anniversary of NASCAR's Drive for Diversity, and I've been doing interviews related to that off and on in different episodes of Beyond the Hype, as well as content at blackenterprise.com. And this episode falls into that recognition. Today we have none other than rising star NASCAR driver. He's currently driving full-time in the NASCAR Craftman Truck Series. He's also driving part-time in the Xfinity Series. Please welcome to the show NASCAR driver and student at Winston-Salem State University, Rajah Caruth. Rajah, man, thank you for joining me on the show.
What's going on, man? Appreciate you having me on.
So listen, you're the 2021 Wendell Scott Trailblazer Award, the first African-American to win at the Tri-County Motor Speedway. There's all kinds of firsts and black firsts based on your age, first on your pathway. Why don't we start by talking about how you got into this in the first place? What was the pathway to you becoming a NASCAR driver?
Yeah, so I was interested in the sport from a young age, from getting toy cars, seeing the Pixar Cars movie, watching racing on YouTube,
Wow.
on television, and playing NASCAR video games. I went to my first race when I was 12 years old at Richmond Raceway, and really from that point forward, it just was pretty linear in my mind of what I wanted to do as a career. So pretty unorthodox way of getting my start in racing, and I didn't set foot in a real car until I was 17. So super late compared to all the people I'm racing against, but wouldn't have changed it for the world.
Yeah, dive into that a little bit more. I got a little bit of your story. I was visiting Talladega a couple months ago. The National Association of Black Journalists had their convention in Birmingham, and NASCAR did an activation where they took a bunch of us journalists to the raceway. And along the way, they did show us a video telling some of your story. But going into the deeper, most drivers kind of start out racing on tracks, whether it's again, correct me if I'm not getting it exactly right, but maybe go-karts. So there's different levels that they drive, and then they eventually, if they're good enough and they stick with it long enough, end up getting an opportunity to drive at your level. But my understanding is you kind of learned how to drive on games and simulators, if you will. How accurate is that in terms of the difference between the way you came to the sport and the way traditionally drivers come to the sport?
Yeah, definitely. So I started racing online when I guess professionally online when I was just turned 16 years old. And man, it was really hard at first bridging the gap between simulation racing and the real thing. But as I've developed and learned and gotten experience in both disciplines, they really are not mutually exclusive and work hand in hand with each other. So that marriage is something that has really helped me develop as a driver, and honestly as an athlete over the last handful of years for sure.
So that's the other thing I didn't know. You're saying you drove professionally, even virtually?
Yeah, so
I
I
didn't know.
did this.
Am I getting that right?
Yeah, or semi-professionally, depending on how you look at it, because the
Right.
platform I competed on, iRacing, it's a publicly available service or simulation platform, as long as you have the software and you pay the membership. But there's merit and skill based competitions that you can compete in, and so they had this one for 13 to 16-year-olds. They had it for a handful of years, and I did the inaugural season of it. And most of the kids I raced against had been, playing iRacing and had racing experience for years prior, and it was really my first go at it. Period. So, I made the championship round, ran up front a little bit, and did well enough to get noticed by the NASCAR Drive for Diversity program. So that's kind of my story in that regard.
So tell me about that transition. Tell me about your experience in the NASCAR diversity program. How did they find you? Did you find them? I know you had very supportive parents with regard to pursuing this passion of yours, even if you didn't know exactly where it was going to lead. Talk about your being quote unquote discovered, or you discovering that there was such a program, and that it was an opportunity for you.
Definitely. So I guess I'd known about the NASCAR Driver Diversity Program for definitely years before I even started, from Bubba Wallace, Daniel Suarez, Kyle Larson, their success in the program and making it out. Other drivers, Chase Cavery, Colin Cavery, Sergio Pena, Ruben Garcia, a lot of talented race car drivers that went through the program. So I knew of its existence, and honestly, that was, my only way I feel like I could have got started in racing. So I had met some of the individuals in that program beforehand, and definitely felt their support and interest. I guess some of them, their interest at first, and definitely turned some heads after, my first handful of races, and as I progressed. So it's all thanks to them that I got to this point so far.
So Raja, I had the opportunity to interview Bubba Wallace earlier this year because he was a fireside chat subject that I interviewed at our Black Enterprise Health as Wealth event in Nashville earlier this year, and he was sharing some of his experience as a driver of color in NASCAR, giving the efforts to diversify the sport over the years. But he made a very important point that I like to relate to your experiences, because it's one thing for you to have the opportunity to drive and the effort, as you said, that it wasn't for that, maybe you wouldn't have gotten exposed to the opportunity to drive. On the flip side, once you're on the track, none of that matters anymore. And Bubba really stressed that, yes, he recognizes and appreciates what it means for him to be on the track in terms of, people like you and even others thinking about this as a sport they could pursue. But when it's all said and done, he wants to be able to perform and to win, so that he's not remembered as like, oh, a black driver in NASCAR. He's remembered for his performance in the sport. Clearly, you had to have talent to get to where you are now. I mean, yes, great, exposing the sport to more people, and more people of color getting the chance to do the sport. But talk to me about what you mentioned earlier about transitioning from simulation to real driving, and then getting to the point where you could actually compete, and you're getting better as time goes by. And again, now you're driving part time at the Xfinity level. Talk to me about that journey that goes beyond, yes, a young black man doing a sport that traditionally hasn't been associated with black athletes, to once you get on the track, now it's about, are you getting better? Are you performing? Or talk to me about that aspect of your experience.
Yeah, definitely. So it's a balance, right? Because representation is extremely important. I mean, I grew up running track, playing basketball, playing soccer, and so in almost all those spaces, right? There's people that look like me and from the places that I'm from, competing at a high level in those fields. So it was never a question of if this was possible. But for racing, it really was far and few between. Uh, you know, black drivers, and so it's a balance, because similar to Bubba, right? Like at the end of the day, the thing that's most important to me right now is my performance, and um, how well I do on the racetrack, because that's what finds sponsors. That's what makes me sleep well at night. And that's what puts money in my pocket, and the money in the pocket of my family members and my team. So that's really what matters. But at the same time, and in the same light, important. It's an important thing to think about, like who I represent, and where I'm from, and that's something I really relish, and a responsibility I really cherish, because I remember there's a lot of times as a little kid, like I wanted to race, and I had that desire, that passion, and not really seeing anybody yet look like me was definitely discouraging at times, for sure. So I definitely welcome that responsibility, but at the same time, man, like I have to perform, because if I don't perform, then it literally all means nothing. So
Well, talk to me about that passion, which, again, for what I'm told, you had it really early on. I mean, like, you knew you wanted to drive, and now I'm hearing the story. You were an athlete in general. You could have played a bunch of sports, including sports that, in many ways, was more accessible to you. What is that thing about this just driving? Is it the speed? Is it the I don't even want to put words in your mouth. What is it that helped you to understand like early on, like this is the thing, this is what I like, this is who I am, and this is what I want to do.
Man, I don't know. It's a lot of it. Um, for whatever reason, it hooked me when I was a little kid. But man, it's the first thing I think about in the morning, and usually the last thing I think about before I go to bed. And
Wow.
it's special, and I feel honestly really thankful and blessed to have something that I'm that passionate about and I care that much about, to where it can consume so much of my day and so much of my mental space that um, I don't get burnt out. And albeit, I'm able to balance it with stuff that I like to do outside of racing, which is few and far in between, but also with school and with friends and family and stuff like that and music. So um, it's just a blessing to have found something that I'm really passionate about. And it drives me every day to be the best race car driver I can be.
You're in a sport unlike many other professional sports where usually you finish school. More, I mean, you may play college ball certainly in basketball and football and even baseball, but you kind of finish school and then you go pro. What's it like to be a professional athlete in this sport? Yet you are, a full time student. I'm assuming, and we'll get into deeper into what you're studying and where you're studying. But you talk about that. I knew before I got as immersed into NASCAR as I have these last, say, 10 months. But I know in general because I have friends who are professional athletes. I got friends who have gone from college to pros, and that in of itself, people I don't think always appreciate how much time it takes. It's not just the performance on the field or on the track; it's all the things that you got to do to be prepared to perform on the field on the track. At the same time, you're also in school, which a lot of athletes once they finish college, they're really just focusing on their profession. So, what is it like for you to balance it? And I got to say this for my audience: this interview was a rescheduled interview because we were going to talk a few days ago, and even though, and I'm saying this, Rajah, I was impressed. You knew that you really couldn't do the interview, but you still showed up exactly on time, which was about, to me, professionalism and time management. But I would imagine your need to be able to manage your time effectively is critical to your being able to balance all these things out.
Yeah, definitely. It's no small task for sure. My days usually start at 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning. Monday, Wednesdays, Thursdays, going to work out and do pre and post race stuff at the Charlotte General Motors Tech Center. Uh, Start there and get my workouts out the way at that point of the day. My Tuesdays, though, I'm up and at 'em to head to school for 8 a.m., which I live an hour away from, so that's a hike of within itself. Um,
Wow.
Besides that, man, my days aren't usually the same. I've got classes. I got 3 classes on Tuesdays, 2 on Thursdays, and 1 on Monday and Wednesday. But sometimes I can't go to them because like I'll have time on the simulator or team meetings I have to go to, or I'm traveling. So it is really hard to balance it, especially since I'm a senior and around in the final corner on my education for sure. And a lot of times I wish I was done because it's like you said, it'd be different if I was, you know, competing in a CIAA or NCAA sport, and that's why I was going to school, and there was some kind of marriage in that aspect, and I've had a lot of support and help from my university and my faculty and my teachers to be supportive and give me some wiggle room, but it is so hard sometimes. So um, a lot of times I'm like, I can't wait to be done. And, I haven't lived on campus, so I haven't had that experience, but I've, been able to go to games and be around on campus. So it's been definitely fun to enjoy those events. But at the same time, I can't wait to be
Sound
done
like
and
you're
keep the
going to
main
be a
thing the main
happy
thing.
man on graduation day,
Yeah.
man.
Yeah. Who you telling, man?
So,
Who you telling?
so tell me about. Let's dive into it. You're a student at Winston-Salem University. You're pursuing a degree in motorsports management. I understand. Um, was that something that was like you knew going into school? That's what you wanted to do. Um, like you said, you even though you didn't go to school for the sport, obviously, but you
Right.
are finding a way to marry what you do professionally with what you're studying. Talk to me about your decision to do that and what it's been like to study sports management, and maybe what you hope to do with it in the long run.
Yeah, it's definitely just helped add perspective to my job. And it's not really a job because I mean I get to drive race cars and that's really cool. But I guess the other parts of it can become like work sometimes. So to provide that perspective to it and overall just the understanding of everything that it takes because it's not just driving a race car in ovals and going across the country and having fun. It's a lot of different jobs, a lot of different things go into the sport from a marketing and PR side and the sponsorship side or a legal side, not even competition related matters. So it's just, like I said, allowed me to see a little bit more of the other side of what it takes and has made me very thankful that I'm the one that gets to race.
Well, I got to tell you, like I said, I've been kind of a casual, I can't even say a casual NASCAR fan before this year. I have to say a casual racing fan. Like I like watching, but I couldn't even really tell. I knew what NASCAR was, but the difference between, say, I don't know, watching a race in Monaco and the different types of racing, the forms of racing in different countries and different types of cars, I had kind of a vague understanding of. But I went to my first NASCAR race actually in Las Vegas. Actually, Bubba did
Nice.
well in that race. I think he finished fourth or fifth. And then I was at the first Chicago street race, which was like amazing. But it was during the Chicago street race as I was doing interviews with executives at NASCAR and at least three pit crew members that I began to really appreciate that while it's a it's perceived as an individual sport because obviously we're focused on, you said, drivers driving fast against other drivers. I think I got a way deeper appreciation that it's a team sport because how the pit crew operates can make or break. Because only a couple of seconds difference between,
Right.
you know, and I interviewed three black pit crew operators who also obviously is part of the effort through Drive for Diversity, including Brianna Daniels, and you talked about you being an athlete in other sports and learning that part of the strategy of recruiting them into pit crews is that that there's an intentionality about recruiting athletes from other sports. Brianna Daniel was a former Division One basketball player. I interviewed a brother whose name escapes me, who was a former a defensive back with the Washington Redskins, and I interviewed a sister who was actually from Paris but ended up in the States because she played soccer for the University of
Yeah,
Miami.
Delonda.
And,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
yes, yes, yes. So I want to kind of weigh in on in terms of this whole beyond the hype conversation to get my audience to understand that this is a sport of athletes, even beyond who's actually behind the wheel of the car, and that many of the skill sets that help athletes succeed in other sports, both physically and mentally, is critical to performance in the pit crew. In terms of what the driver needs to get the cars in and out and to do all those things that I would say speak for myself. I won't speak for everybody else. I think I kind of took the pit crew thing for granted to some degree. Yeah, they got to change tires real fast, but I got a deep appreciation for that. So talk to me about that in terms of your experience, especially transitioning from um, virtual competition to physical competition. Because I mean, I guess when you did simulated races, there wasn't a pit crew aspect of it. Just talk to me about that from the driver's point of view.
Yeah, no question. That's a great point. Not only from a driver's perspective, but also from a pit crew's perspective, athleticism is a key part of our sport. Yeah, no question. That's a great point. Not only from a driver's perspective, but also from a pit crew's perspective, athleticism is a key part of our sport. As a driver, on my side, it's kind of helped me because I mean, I like I said, having an athletic background that's helped me in not only in the gym but on the racetrack and honestly in a competitive nature. And especially for our guys and gals that risk their lives going over the pit wall. A lot of them are like former football players, hoopers, soccer players, uh, track athletes, really you name it. And so to see their elevation and their caliber of professionalism has been awesome, but also like it allows people to show their true athleticism and how they can get down, on the pit lane. So it's a great opportunity for those
Yeah, I
individuals,
was
and
enlightened because
it's great to see that
again, I come with
nowadays,
this
they're getting
as a
recognition, they're getting,
casual
for the
fan
most part, the
turned
pay
into
that they
hardcore fan
deserve,
because now
and
I'm like, I
the
was
reps
raised a
that
football fan.
they need
I
to get
came from
there.
a football house, and for the first time, I'm watching NASCAR like the playoffs now with the same fervor that I grew up watching football. But the whole idea of pit crew combines was like a revelation to me. I was, yeah, we got invited to a combine where they want to know how fast can you change a 75-pound tire, how fast can you, and the thing that struck me was not only it struck me, and particularly with basketball. I think Brianna was a point guard, and again, I wish I could remember the brother's name, who was he was a linebacker, not a DB, a linebacker, and but they were like the quarterbacks of their teams in their respective sports, because on
Definitely.
defense the linebacker is the quarterback, or at least the middle linebacker is. But how that not only translates from the physical athleticism, but the degree of coordination, because everybody has to move in a certain coordinated effort to get your car in and out of the pit without penalties, without injuring. Because, like you said, it's people think of the danger to the driver. They don't always think of the danger to the pit crew. That one wrong
Exactly.
step, you know, and so it's a really delicate balance of coordination that true exists in basketball and exists in soccer and exists in football. But in some ways, the stakes are higher if those people don't get it right. Even if the driver does everything perfect while they're on the track.
Yeah.
So I,
Sorry, I cut you off, but man,
no, you good. Go, bro. Go.
yeah, it's just great to see them get the recognition they deserve, because our pit crew athletes, they play an integral part of winning and losing races, which is can be frustrating at times because, right, when you have an average pit stop where you maintain, it's not really discussed, but if you have a really good one, it's talked about. But if you have a bad one, it's also talked about. So it's just
Mhm.
imperative to give those cats what they deserve, the recognition they deserve, because they're a huge part of the team, and whether we're competing for the win or not in contention.
Talk to me. I mean, we got. I don't want to spend all the time talking around it. I want to talk about what you do when you're doing it. What does it feel like, man? Whether well, let's start with the truck series. I mean, what does it feel like? I've been in a pace car. I've been in previous experiences, been on racetracks. I know I went to a BMW facility at one time, and they literally took us out, and talked about the speed of the car, and they demonstrated that. But of course, I don't know what it means to drive as fast as you have to drive with cars near you, and you're trying to get past them, they're trying to get past you. What is that experience like for you as a driver? What does it mean to sit in that car and do what you do?
Yeah, it's man, it's crazy because it shouldn't feel this way, but when I'm in the race car, I just I feel at peace, like nothing. I don't have any things that I was harboring, away from the track, away from my environment, all kind of dissolve in my mind. All the things elsewhere that I had going on, they all cease to exist, and I just feel at peace in that one in the car, and everything makes sense. So it's an
That is
unreal
crazy to
feeling.
me.
Yeah, you'd think that that's kind of nuts, right? Like that crazy of an environment, and for me to find that kind of solitude in there. But it is for me, and so I'm grateful to have that, and I enjoy it. And it's stressful moments for sure because you're driving like a 3,400 pound stock car with hundreds of horsepower with other people next to you going at insane rates of speed. But for me, I found peace in that somehow.
I learned a lot about the safety mechanisms that are designed to protect the driver. Um, and obviously that to some degree is an issue in most sports, certainly in football. But you've been in crashes before. Um, well, let me just say this: how does your mama feel about you?
Oh
I mean, I
man,
know
so
they've
look,
all your parents have been supportive, But when you really, got serious, and I mean, I'm trying to remember. I remember how my mother felt when I was an undersized football player, and she was convincing me you don't want to play that game. Um, what is it like for your parents? Again, I know they've been supportive. I do understand that, but man, you're right. Something can go wrong, and I've seen crashes. What's that like?
Yeah. Yeah, man. My mom, I won't say she was a hater, but she definitely was not on the hype train at first when I first started. But, I've had love and support, nothing
Mhm.
but from my parents, my little sister, extended friends and family from jump. So it's been a blessing to have that. As far as crashes go and how races go, I can tell my mom be like this, when she's watching and stuff like that. But, um, it is what it is. I've had to show her like all the safety stuff we got going on, so it's all right, it's okay, and not to take it for granted for sure, but taking accountability for what we do to ensure that I'm safe and all the other drivers are safe.
Was that at all ever a thought or a challenge or an adjustment that you had made as you transitioned from simulated racing to physical racing? I mean, how did you reconcile the physicality of the sport and the speed and the impact and all of that?
Not really, man. Like, I guess I'll bring up this example, right? So some racetracks, running really close to the wall is faster. It's an advantage, and so that was honestly one of the hardest things for me because you don't have that sensation of being next to the wall that fast when you race online. So that is something that took me a long time, and
Wow.
it's still taking me a while to learn on that technique. But man, it's something that I've really grown into liking, and so as far as crashes go, you accept that as a driver, like you accept you could get hurt or not walk away from the next race you do. But it's the risk we take, and it's not like we're naive to the fact, and at the same time, like we're not gonna do for the most part stupid things that put us at more of a risk than it normally would. So it's a risk we take. That's why we signed the little waivers before the season starts when we get our license, and we do all the little things that we need to do to ensure we're safe at the same time. Try our best to compete at the highest level.
Talk to me, and you made me think about this. NASCAR is a family sport and a family owned sport. And one of the things that I really learned from hanging around, especially this year, because I was at Daytona this year. Again, I already told you I was at Chicago street race. I visited Talladega. It wasn't a race day. But I met, of course, Bubba and members of his team. I was there when Bubba qualified for the playoffs, which was a lot of fun. I interviewed him for Black Enterprise for that. But this idea that I think I've only ever seen also in football, um, that even though you're competing against one another, you're very conscious of, like you said, the inherent risk of driving, and therefore, while you're competing, but nobody wants anybody to get hurt, and even there's this balancing act whether yes, I'm competing, and maybe a crash might put me in a competitive advantage to some degree, especially if you get caught up in it and I don't. But everybody wants to walk away from it. I've talked to my friends that play football. Like nobody wants, even your most hated rival on a team, you don't want to see his career ended, or you don't want to see him off on a stretcher. That after that, all the competition fades away because when all is said and done, the overall health of the sport is conditioned on the overall safety of the athletes. And that was something I felt in common with the drivers that I've talked to over this year in NASCAR. How does that aspect of the sport impacted your experience as a driver?
Yeah, it's a fine line, right? Because you don't want to have on the conscience that you intentionally did something that hurt somebody or something worse, But at the same time, you can't let drivers like take advantage of you or abuse
Mm.
that care. And so it's a fine line that I've honestly struggled with a little bit this year of like standing up for myself and not tolerating certain racecraft or etiquette, but at the same time like not doing something that could potentially hurt somebody's because there always will be another race, right? But you can't do something that'll potentially hurt somebody for real. But in that same heart or same line, or I guess on that same note, you can't let somebody keep doing something to you. And if you get someone good enough one time, then probably won't mess with you again. So it's a
Mhm.
thin balance. especially with how the penalty systems are and how it's not necessarily black and white. It's a thin line to assess, and again, something that I've honestly struggled with a little bit this year of just learning about how to handle it. But something that is, I feel like, some is pretty dynamic.
Hmm.
But the thing is different than other sports because, um, I mean, you can't outright do something to somebody that could, like I said, potentially hurt them or you or other people or bystanders and spectators. So it's definitely different in that light, but at the same time, you can't let yourself get taken advantage of.
As we come down the home stretch of our interview, and I really appreciate the time you're given to Beyond the Hype and the Black Enterprise, let's turn a little bit back to you as kind of a symbol of everything that's happened these last 20 years. And now we're not just talking about on the track, we're talking about, owners like Michael Jordan. You're talking about, like you named some of the other athletes in your sport. We've talked about, um, you know, um, the pit crew and the diversity that we see in pit crews. And I can speak, in terms of my experience this year of seeing black executives and executives of color in general, but black executives in particular, in positions ranging from director of communications to HR director to all aspects of the sport. That the NASCAR that I see now and know is not the NASCAR that I knew about when I was your age, and I'm much older than you are. But when NASCAR started on this journey for diversity, I was one of those guys that was like, that sounds good, but but now I got to say, 20 years later, or almost 20 years later, as of 2024, I got to say, as someone who was skeptical at the front end of this issue, you understand, Black Enterprise has been covering diversity in corporate America in sports. I mean, we've been around 53 years now,
Right.
so we've seen programs come and go, we've seen initiatives come and go, and the kind of good old boy legacy of NASCAR, at least in the minds when you think of sort like Dukes of Hazard. You probably don't even know what Dukes of Hazard is, but whatever it is,
No, I
you
know what it
know.
is. Fortunately or fortunately, I'm aware.
Okay, but so I got to say, I am now a believer. Not that I necessarily believe the hype, because the whole show is beyond the hype. But when I look beyond the surface of a Bubba Wallace, and you see who's on the track, but then I look at these other layers, the pit crews, the executives in the front office, of the sport, both on teams and in NASCAR proper. Um, Even the last guest I had on the show around this NASCAR series of interviews, Latasha Causey, who is the president of Arizona, the Phoenix Raceway. It looks like NASCAR has put its money where its mouth is over these last 20 years. So you're part of a continuing story, and you go back to your connection to Wendell Scott, who was a legendary barrier-breaking black race car driver. Right now, your goal is just to excel at the sport, as you said. But you also say, yeah, representation does do matter. What does it mean for you to be a part of this legacy? And I predict that someday there's going to be some kid that's racing because they saw you race, or they saw this interview, or their parents showed them about you. What does that mean to you when all is said and done?
I appreciate that, man. I think from my side, like, I don't know, to just have that acknowledgement from a sport and an industry that I've cherished and I've loved since I was a little kid, and is honestly a part of my identity, is really special. It's NASCAR's 75th anniversary, and so to be a part of that in a small capacity is it's really special. So, um, man, I'm really thankful, and I just look back on everything with gratitude and motivation at the same time because I feel like I have a lot left to do as a driver and hopefully a long runway as an athlete.
Tell me about your this season. What goals did you set at the beginning of the season? Um, and how do you feel about your performance this season? Um, as this kind of season of racing kind of winds down, what was your experience this year, and how do you feel about it?
Yeah, it's honestly bittersweet, with the team I signed with shutting down. So not really having plans for next year so far to having a lot of potential, a lot of upside. Where I've run up front and led laps and competed in the top five, but not making the playoffs, only having two top tens, definitely a stinger for sure. So definitely bittersweet this year, but positives wise, we've done a lot of cool things, and I feel like I have some good potential in the last handful of races this year, and um, just got to look at the glass as half full and not half empty, and take advantage of the races we have left.
So you talked a little bit about how between school and obviously your profession, you don't have a heck of a lot of time or necessarily even desire to do other things because you love racing so much. But at the same time, balance is important. Your ability to balance. What are some of the things that you do to kind of, you know, I spend a lot of time on this show talking about the importance of balancing things out for long-term performance. I'm the generation that had to learn the hard way that rest and recovery is not a distraction from work. It's 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 imperative for long-term performance if you're going to excel over time. What are the things that you do, like you said, when the pressure of racing is one thing as much as you enjoy it, you got the pressure of which you'll be finishing up thankfully this year at school, and of course I'm sure you got other commitments and obligations, relationships. But what do you do when you just need to take care of you? What are the things that you do to decompress, manage your mindset, you know, um, besides the piece of speeding around an oval track at ungodly speeds?
Yeah, I think for me, like I like basketball. I love watching basketball. So the NBA season starting up in a little bit. So definitely will be watching my Washington Wizards. Besides that, I love superhero movies. I'm a little nerd for that stuff. So Marvel movies, all the Marvel shows, DC movies and DC shows, I like those. Besides that, music, I
I'm a
like
hardcore
really all
Marvel
kinds of.
guy.
No worries, man. I like them both equally,
Yeah,
not
I
equally,
got a
but
Captain America shield right here on the floor.
yeah, I got a nice little Black Panther helmet. I wear a lot of the or use a lot for my races. But besides that, I mean,
Oh,
music
cool.
wise, like I grew up, in a household with reggae music because I come from a Caribbean family, so that's been kind of second nature. But as a whole, like I mean, I like rap and R&B, right? Because that's also what I grew up around. But living in North Carolina the last 3 years, I've taken a liking to country music a little bit, especially because of the sport that I'm in. So I feel like I've got a pretty diverse
Mhm.
music taste. Besides that, I mean, I'm a pretty boring guy. I've been starting to get out a little bit more because I am a homebody at nature at heart. Um,
Mhm.
Additionally, though, I have a kind of a knack now for hiking and going on little bike rides in national parks and stuff like that, and just seeing nature. So um, that's been some of the things I've done to just balance everything and start every day and every night with a little prayer, and that's it.
My speaking of country music, my stepdad, that was his favorite music. Actually, my father and my stepfather's favorite music was country music. I never made that connection just now, but man, I don't listen to it as much as I think I should. But I think of some of my favorite songs, and they are country music songs. And I don't think I had a deep appreciation for that until these last few years. So that's very interesting. But again, you get exposed to it, you learn that there's good music everywhere, really. Um, in the time we have left, what is the best way for our audience to kind of follow you, follow your career? I don't know if you're active on social. Obviously, I told you I think your website is great, but what's the best way for the Beyond the Hype audience to keep up with what you're doing now and going forward?
Yeah, so you mentioned my website. I appreciate the positivity there. So my website is rajahcaruth.com. RAJAHCARUTH.com is my website. My social media, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Rajah Caruth underscore. I've got a YouTube channel, got a Facebook page,
Okay.
and that's really it. And I try to be active a little bit there. I did take it off my phone just to kind of use my time a little bit more productively, but I'm still active on there sometimes for sure.
Well, listen, Roger, I was looking forward to this interview. I'm glad we were able to pull it off. Definitely, you and Bubba have inspired me to not just pay attention to you as athletes. Well, not just you guys, the pit crew people. Let me just say this: I've become a pit crew fan. Like now, I want to follow. the pit crew people, like you said, like you follow a driver, but you want to follow the pit crew people. I got a deep appreciation for that because I'm actually, I'm just into team sports, and I like the whole idea of having to coordinate to achieve success. Um, but I just want to thank you for what you've done, what you're doing. I wish you all the best. I'm definitely looking forward to seeing whatever you do, both on the track and off the track, in terms of your study of sports management. Um, I do want you to weigh in on one more thing about your appreciation for the sport as a business. And I think now you are part of a generation of athletes who appreciate that. I'm talking about all sports, who now appreciate that on the front end of their careers, where previous generations often didn't appreciate it until the end of their careers, when it was almost too late. The idea that you're studying sports management, and I don't know what that means for your long-term goals, but your appreciation of understanding NASCAR as a business as well as a fun thing to do. What does that mean for you?
Yeah, it's and honestly for me, it's like I said earlier, it provides perspective, but also, for those that ask me about the sport of like, oh, well, what else can I do besides being a driver because I'm too young or I'm not interested in it? It shows there's so many different things you can get involved in from a competition standpoint, whether it be still in an athletic capacity, to being at an engineering level, a mechanic level, and even from aside of the competition stuff, whether it be sports marketing, which is one of the classes I've got, sponsorship, legality, hospitality stuff, race operations, managing the books. Really, there's so many different opportunities to make money and good money at that in the sport and have a good livelihood as well. So I think that's kind of what it provides for me to express to other people as well.
I've been exposed to a couple of programs. I think Bethune Cookman has one where getting HBCU students involved in, like you said, all aspects of NASCAR. And I also mentor and support a young lady named Dorothy Tillman, known as Dorothy Genius or Dorothy Jean Tillman, who is a champion of STEAM education and STEAM initiative for young people. And her excitement around NASCAR because of its connection to science, technology, engineering, arts, and math, it just speaks to everything you just said about there's so many, just like with all sports, that if you only focus on what's happening for the athletes and you don't look at the larger industry, you're missing a world of opportunity. Even if you're like me, who discovered early on that despite my love of football, I wasn't cut out for it. That's not the life for me. I want to
Yeah.
close out with one more thing you told me when we talked briefly before. You said you had a grandfather that was was a competitive bodybuilder, and that's my chosen sport. I'm a natural bodybuilder for not on a pro level, believe me, I'm an amateur. But tell me about that legacy, because I knew I was going to ask you about that before I let you go.
Yeah, man. So you'd have to ask my mom for more details on that. But like I had mentioned before, my dad
Yeah.
is side of the my dad and his side of the family is from St. Vincent, and my mom's side of the family is from Barbados and St. Vincent. So my granddad on my mom's side, God rest his soul, he was a bodybuilder in the '70s, for Barbados. I'm pretty sure. I don't really know all the details, but I've seen old pictures. Um, he used to show me how he could like move his pecs and stuff when I was younger. So it was pretty cool. I've learned how to do that as I've gotten older. So that's been a cool thing to, I guess, remember him by. But that's really all I know. You'd honestly have to ask my mom for more details on that.
I'm going to follow it up and look it up because I like studying old school bodybuilders anyway. But listen, Roger, you've been very generous with your time. I really appreciate you joining the show. Wish you all the best. Thank you for being my guest on Beyond the Hype.
Yes, sir. Appreciate you having me on, and hopefully everybody enjoyed listening.
I'm sure they did. Listen, everybody, we've done it again. Another great edition of Beyond the Hype with Rajah Caruth, NASCAR driver, sports management student, and just all around good young brother. So listen, thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time. Take care.